Welcome everybody to the second half of today's planning committee taking place in the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. It is Tuesday the 12th of December 2023 and the time is 2 p.m. My name is Councillor Jane Rutter and I am Chair of the Planning Committee. To my right is Councillor Edwards, who is Vice Chair. Around the table we have other elected members of the committee and we are supported today by our officers, Lorna Hutchings from the planning team, Daniel Lucas, our legal advisor, the case officers who tend to change with each item, and Claire Buchanan from Democratic Services who supports the committee and operates the recording equipment. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the Council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Please can I remind everyone to ensure your mobile phones and any other electronic devices are on silent or preferably turned off entirely. In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. And we know the fire alarm is working because it was tested this morning. Please look at the handout provided on your chairs or on the information slides displayed as you walked in and during the breaks for further guidance about this meeting. To ensure the smooth running of the meeting, I ask that nobody calls out from the back of the room during the proceedings. In accordance with the public speaking protocols, those who have registered to speak will be able to address the meeting for their allotted time. If there is any disruption of the proceedings and the committee is not respected, it may be necessary to temporarily adjourn the meeting. Finally, I'd like to welcome members of the public to the meeting. Those of you who have registered to speak, I will call you forward when it is your turn to make your contribution. Members of the committee may ask you questions of clarification, so please remain at the microphone until after members' questions. The microphone is turned on by pressing the button on the base of the unit and a timer will appear on the screen to remind you of any remaining time. And on the update sheet, we need to put in an additional public speaker this morning. Well, not really a public speaker, but anyway, a member of the Cabinet will address us on item number 11, and that is Councillor Kelsey Lerney. Good, so I think we're ready to move to the next item on our agenda, item 11, which is the development of an electric vehicle charging station with associated access, parking, etc. at 3 Maids Field, Andover Road, Littleton in Hampshire. And the parish is Hedbourne Worthy. And I have explained that I am a parish councillor, but I haven't discussed this at all. Our presenting officer is Liz Young, so if you'd like to give us the presentation, Liz.
Thank you.
Sorry, Liz, my apologies. Councillor Cunningham did express a predetermination and has left the meeting and will return after this item. Thank you very much. Sorry, Liz. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this application relates to the development of an electric vehicle charging station on an area of agricultural land at 3 Maids Hill. So just before we go on to the main slides, just a quick update following the submission of an odour assessment by the applicant, which has been submitted to address the objections raised by environmental protection in relation to the impact of odour levels from the adjacent land use on the proposed development and visitors to the site. The assessment within this report has been reviewed and it's considered this overcomes the objection raised by environmental protection. So as a result, the 5th reason for refusal can be removed from the report. Just moving on to the slides. This first slide just shows the site location and site plan. The application site lies between the A272 Andover Road to the west and the A34 to the east. An access which provides access between both of these roads lies immediately to the south. So that's in the form of a roundabout immediately south of the site. The site is accessed by a field gate off the A272. So just moving the cursor to the approximate location, the access is just in this area here. Just moving on to the next slide, this is just an aerial view looking towards the application site, which is marked by the yellow star. The red lines indicate the locations of public rights of way, the closest one being approximately 600 metres to the east. The site lies in open countryside, just over a kilometre from the settlement of Littleton. Just to give a bit of background in terms of neighbouring sites and uses, permissions recently been granted immediately north of the site for the development of an anaerobic digester use. So that's immediately north of the site in this area here. This consent expires in, construction works have commenced on this development, so further to the north, there's the development of solar array, and this has now been constructed, although it's not visible in this particular area for aerial photo. It's about 500 metres to the north of the site. So just moving on to the next photograph, this is just a topographical survey of the site. The land rises slightly towards the northeast and also towards the southwest. It's on slightly lower ground than the surrounding roads. This next slide just shows the proposed site layout. The access would remain in its current location, but would be widened to form a bell mouth. The proposed service station would be operational 24 hours a day and would consist of 33 charging bays. So this is the main area here. 4 van charging bays, which would be just at the top of the site. 4 drive-through bays for long towing vehicles. Oh, sorry, let's go back. And 3 accessible bays, which would be located north of the restaurant. So the restaurant itself is to the south, that's shaded in purple, just here. Immediately east of that, there would be a substation and battery storage within a compound. There's also an outdoor seating and play area. Various landscaping measures are also proposed, and the area shaded in brown at the top is an ecological buffer area. Just moving on to this next slide, this shows in more detail the proposed access alterations. So the proposed access layout largely replicates that of the extant waste processing use on the site. That consent relates to the development of an inert waste recycling facility and expires in June 2025. No, Highways have not raised any objections to the development and are satisfied with the proposed level of visibility. The information that's been submitted indicates the application for the proposed development would generate approximately 62-way vehicle movements each hour. This next slide just shows the proposed elevations for the restaurant building, which would be in the southern part of the site. The enlarged elevation at the bottom of the page is the main front elevation, which would face north into the site. The overall height would be approximately 5 metres. Additional lighting information that's come in indicates that building mounted lights are proposed around the outside of the building. This next slide just shows the proposed roof plan and floor plan for the restaurant. So at the top of the page is the roof plan. As you can see, the roof would be covered by solar panels. That's approximately 380 square metres. This next slide just shows the perspective drawings for the restaurant. The facing materials would be blue and black brickwork with timber effect cladding above. This just shows where the restaurant would sit within the overall site layout in a bit more detail. So you can see, so obviously the purple shaded larger rectangle is the restaurant building. So immediately east of this, you have the proposed compound with the substation and battery storage. And then to the west, there's the proposed outdoor play area and outdoor seating. This next slide just shows the proposed signage. 9 signs are proposed altogether across the site. The tallest one being approximately 2.5 meters. So just to give a bit of background, as I mentioned, the permission's been granted for a waste processing use on the site. So this would see approximately 75 tonnes of waste handled and recycled each year. Would generate between 15 76 lorry movements a day. It's been closed by a landscape fund, and this consent expires in June 2025. As a result of this consent, the site is on the Minerals and Waste Safeguarded Sites list. This next plan just shows the proposed lights bill for the development. The only thing to note is the fact that this proposal shows slight increase in the number of lights, these additional lights being mainly around the proposed restaurant building, but also immediately north of the proposed compound. So this next slide just shows the approved anaerobic digester development, which is immediately north of the site. So you can see on the location plan, the application site lies just here to the south. And then the anaerobic digester immediately to the north. So works have commenced on this development, and it basically involved taking in agricultural crops and food waste from agricultural land in the immediate area, and this would be processed on site to produce agricultural fertilizer. Just moving on to the site photographs. This first photo just shows the view of the existing access off the A272. As I mentioned, the access is to be widened to provide visibility. Some of the existing vegetation would need to be removed just to provide the required level of visibility to satisfy highways. This photo is just taken from the southwest corner of the site. So this is looking along the boundary with the A272. So that road's just immediately the other side of the trees you can see on the left. You can just see in the distance the anaerobic digester site where groundworks have commenced. This photo is taken closer towards the north boundary of the site, again looking towards the anaerobic digester proposal. So the trees you can see in the distance mark the boundary with the A34, which is just beyond the trees. This is from the southeast corner of the site, looking towards the approximate location of the access. And this is the photo looking towards the southwest corner, so taken from approximately where the access is. As you can see, ground levels rise slightly towards this boundary. The proposal is to set the proposed restaurant building down into the ground as a result of this. And this photo is just taken looking towards the southwest corner of the site, which is where the proposed outdoor seating and play area would be located. That brings us to the end of the slides. Just in conclusion, the recommendation is that planning permission should be refused. It's acknowledged that there is wider government support and also within our own EV strategy for the provision of additional EV parking. However, it's important to ensure it's directed to the right locations and to areas where it delivers maximum benefits. Alongside this issue, there is concerns alongside the open countryside location that in relation to the design and visual impact and the development, the loss of a safeguarded waste use, and also the proposed parking provision. That concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. We now turn to the public speaking. So our first contributor is Cabinet Member Councillor Lerny. Councillor Lerny, you will have 5 minutes, and the time will start when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the late permission to speak, which is much appreciated. I am speaking today as Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency, which also involves responsibility for transport in the district. Normally I would come to speak to this committee well versed with the relevant local planning policy, but in this case we have an application for a use on which our planning policy has little guidance. The provision of service station style facilities to enable those on long journeys or those without home charging to rapidly charge and carry on with their day is a very recent innovation, and although clearly it's needed infrastructure, policy has yet to catch up. The National Planning Policy Framework says that we should be planning to support necessary transport infrastructure, and this clearly now should include facilities for rapid charging on our major trunk roads. And although the emerging plan is silent on the issue of the provision of this kind of charging facility, it does set out as one of its aims, and I quote, "Well considered parking, servicing and utilities infrastructure for all users." We have not identified suitable locations for this in either existing or emerging policy, and I think this is a clear gap which we do need to deal with as we go forward. The site is just outside the area covered by the Winchester Air Quality Strategic Planning document approved in 2021, which aims to improve local air quality and reduce public health impacts, and importantly also to attract investment in clean technology, sustainable travel and renewable energy. When we look at other council policy, we have declared a climate emergency, and our own carbon neutrality action plan commits us to the rapid decarbonisation of our own transport and to facilitate the decarbonisation of others. And action on this is needed sooner rather than later. The council's electric charging strategy was published in 2018 and is very much out of date. While as a council we have been looking at providing fast charging, it is clear there is limited potential for this within land under our control, mainly due to access to sufficient power. When considering locations for these facilities, we also have to consider the Winchester movement strategy, which has the clear goal of reducing unnecessary car journeys into the city. The movement strategy is, of course, part of the evidence base for the emerging local plan and is another area of policy which we should be considering when we're taking planning decisions. I think the suggestion that other sites could be used is very speculative. An alternative site suggested is the A34 services, which are in a location poorly served by public transport and pedestrian and cycle links, and even further away from significant centres of population. But importantly, it's not supported by the necessary energy infrastructure needed for the charging of a significant number of vehicles. This site, which we're looking at today, has access to the needed supply, including from renewable sources, and while it is currently farmland, it will not remain so. As has been stated, permission has already been given for change of use. It is on an already very well lit major junction right by the A34, close to other lit facilities, such as the Winchester Golf Academy, which for those of you who know the area, lights up the sky for miles around. And this site can be well screened with minimal impact on the local area and has the potential for biodiversity net gain. The application is supported by Littleton and Harestock Parish Council, who recognise the appropriateness of the use of the site with suitable conditions, and notably we have no objectors today. So I would ask the committee to agree this application as one which supports the council's wider aims, even if our policies have not yet caught up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lenny. Members, do we have any questions of clarification for our Cabinet member? No, thank you very much. If you could just switch off the, thank you. And our next public speaker is the supporter, Stephen Bainbridge. If you'd like to come forward, Mr. Bainbridge. Thank you. You know how to switch on the microphone, and you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you very much. If you'd like to.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair, good afternoon, councillors. I've done that plenty of times. I had my speech already, but something Councillor Laming said earlier sort of sent me off on a tangent, and I've rewritten it. So I'm going off script, which I've never done before. Reason for refusal number 1 raises the operational need point, doesn't it? And the local plan gives a few examples of operational needs, of somewhat old-fashioned forestry, agriculture, etc., as if they're the only things that happen in the countryside anymore. You may decide that there is an operational need here. The vehicles don't just move around the city. EV car owners leave the city and traverse around the district, through the district, etc. But we don't need to be bound by the operational need point, because if you look to your emerging policy, CN5, and on the point about policy not catching up, it is. CN5 is there. Your current low carbon development policy, CP11, bit old fashioned, it sort of deals with renewables being attached to buildings, that sort of thing. But CN5 is more up to date, and it's to do with renewable energy creating development, so solar, biogas plants, EV car charging hubs. If you look through the policy criteria there, I think it ticks all the boxes. Importantly, CN5 doesn't have any operational need criteria at all. So you can move away from NTRA4 and think, well, we don't need to satisfy operational need, we'll just go with CN5. So there's a route out there that keeps everybody happy. That's just my off-script moment there on the policies. Just going back to the script, there are some benefits that trot through. We've got 0.5 megawatt of renewable energy from the on-site solar. Economic development goes just beyond jobs on site, and the NPPF tells you to give significant weight to that. So that's skills and training and other things associated with low carbon development. Biodiversity net gain, 15% over and above the current condition of the field. Climate change and transport decarbonisation. Your local plan says that Winchester has one of the highest per capita carbon footprints in the southeast, apparently. Benefits to air quality, the need to accelerate the provision of EV car charging infrastructure, which your local plan says is necessary. The electricity grid in Winchester is heavily constrained until beyond 2025. Climate emergency statement says that you should be focusing on EV car charging for urban, which you're doing, but for rural sites, as well as grid capacity and energy storage. So we tick 3 of those. You're in debt. More rapid chargers are needed in the district by 2025, more than you have in the pipeline, and that's just to keep pace. Our development will put you in credit now. Public perception, your local transport plan cautions that not delivering viable EV infrastructure for the wider district and city. The council may have been a lot facilitating.
3 minutes.
Open for questions.
But members, we do have an opportunity to ask questions of clarification. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. These are some questions that were actually put at the site meeting that we attended. First one is the location. How do all people know you are there? Because there's no external signage.
No, so I would say nobody will know we're there unless you own an EV and you have an app, and the app will take you there. So from that point of view, issues of visual impact and the like, or it becoming a destination in its own right, those fears should go away. If you have an EV, you'll have ZapMap, and you'll be led there by your phone, which you shouldn't be using while you're driving. It'll be on the side.
The other one refers to a small footpath that leads in from the access and seems to stop at the bund. Was that a recognised registered footpath?
Say again, there's the red line.
The gateway, there is a small footpath off to the left, which ran right the way through the site. Is that a recognised footpath?
No, is this the red line that's shown on the mapping?
Yeah, it
Is that
comes into your park.
Yeah, I think that red line, if it's the one that's shown on the council's mapping, was on an original site plan for the AD plant, but they then, I think, amended their plans, had the much larger access.
It's page 241.
If it's not the very slim one, then the landowner, there you go, the landowner has reserved the right of access through for landowner purposes.
Okay, fine. Also, what was mentioned or asked was the supply, the existing electrical supply. Could you just tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so there's a secured grid connection from SSE with, I think it's a gigawatt already in contract, and then more coming down the line. Sorry, not gigawatt, megawatt. Crikey, gigawatt.
Okay, thank you, Chair. That covers the questions that I asked.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is around the whole energy balance and so on. So how much energy are we generating on site, and how many cars would that charge? I mean, the flow was, I forget what it was, something like 60 or 80 an hour. Was that anticipated? So, I mean, how does this all equate in terms of what you're creating, what you're taking from the grid, what you're storing? Give me some sense of how that looks.
Yes, so the solar is meant to make the site pretty self-sustaining. The solar is half a megawatt, and that should service the cars themselves. You'll have to forgive me, I'm not an electrical engineer. Colleagues of mine are. I'm a planner, but in my basic understanding, it's relatively self-sustaining. And
the anaerobic digestion plant to the north is clearly creating some renewable energy. I just wonder, is that in your schema of thinking, and how that might link into servicing this site in any shape or form, the biogas, I don't know, heating for, you know, the restaurant or whatever it might be?
Not currently, but at the moment we're not entirely clear where the foul will go, the assumption being it'll be tankered away. So maybe, and depending on whether the past regulations on taking human waste to an AD plant are changed in the future, that may be something that can hook up. It's always terribly frustrating to have these things sitting side by side. And from what I understand, they're tapped into the same cable route, but for them not quite to link up. But there's nothing stopping that from happening in the future.
And my final question, if I may, is on the solar farm to the north. Is there any? Are there any opportunities there in terms of how that might link up to this site?
I understand it, we're all tapped into the same main cable, which goes to the point of connection in the corner of our site. But technically, the three things, albeit they're cheap by joule, are separate to each other, albeit they're proximate. But there's no direct linkages, albeit they're all feeding in and out of the same grid.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yeah, sorry, I wonder if you could just clarify this, the question of self-sustaining. Obviously, the solar panels are going to be efficient in the summer, but in the winter, longer nights and so on, there's obviously going to be a fluctuation with that. But at the same time, there's obviously going to be a fluctuation in the amount of vehicles moving. You know, imagine on a summer's day before a bank holiday. Is it always possible to match the supply to the demand?
No, that's why there's battery storage on site, but also Instavolt secure all of their energy from renewable sources anyway. So
right, okay.
the energy coming down the wire, when the site isn't looking after itself, you'll be able to call it green because it'll have come from a renewable source somewhere else.
Thank you.
Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. We've spoken about self-evidently all the parking for the users, but there will be staff on site. I wonder if you could say how many staff and how they will get to the site, and if they come by vehicle, where will they park?
Yeah, so we're not sure how many staff yet, but I can't think there'll be very many because there weren't very many covers when we looked at the floor plan on site yesterday. If staff parking needs to be secured, I'm sure between us we can come up with a condition today. And if you need a travel plan for that few people, again, you can condition a travel plan.
Thank you. Any more questions for the representative of the applicant? Thank you very much, Mr. Bainbridge. You
Thank
may
you.
sit down. If you could switch off the mic
Yes.
and retake your place. Thank you. Liz, did you want to make any comments following all that?
Thank you, Chair. No, thank you.
Good. So, members, I think we'll take the whole report. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. When you were reporting, Liz, and thank you very much for the site visit yesterday, it was extremely useful. You referred to the wood effect. Did you just enlarge on that?
Talking about the cladding to the restaurant.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand it's been labelled on the application as would affect cladding, so I presume that would be the composite style cladding that you tend to see, well, buildings like this sometimes, but it wouldn't be an actual wood from what I've seen on the information. An artificial composite.
And inside the building, I noticed there are 40 covers. For how many pumps? Was it 38?
44 overall if you include the large towing bays and the others. 44 charging stations.
So we're taking questions on the whole report, members, and also, of course, the update sheet has quite a bit of information on there. Councillor Lee.
I think I read somewhere that there was concern about signage, countryside, and I'm just wondering, what is the intention given that concern? Obviously, we need to signpost where the site is. What's the limitations? Is there a real constraint on how the site managers would want to signpost where the site is? I appreciate what Mr. Stanbridge has said. I'm an EV car driver. I don't need signposts because it's on my Zap map or it's on my console. But I mean, signage is going to be an issue, I would imagine.
Yeah, so you're asking what the concern with the signage is. Yeah, so the concern related to the potential for visual clutter across the site and the fact, well, the concern that not all of the signage proposed is functional or essential. So that was the concern, basically, the impact it has upon the character of the site, bearing in mind the extent of the signage and the fact that it's, you know, covering quite a large area on the site. That was the main issue.
So it's about the site rather than signage on the highway or elsewhere. Okay.
Yeah, it's more about the character of the whole development, the combination of the lighting and signage.
Okay, and if I may, just supplementary on the lighting, I think it was said that lighting we put on the buildings. But is there an intention to have low level light, what I call national park sensitive lighting, to reduce the overall loom effect from the site, which is obviously going to be operating 24/7?
Yeah, so in terms of lighting proposed across the site, the lighting would be bollard lights, which are quite low. Alongside those, there's the building mounted lights. On the update sheet, you'll see there's a lighting specification which has been submitted along with the light spill plan. The lighting specification basically sets out that the lighting is designed to minimise impacts on ecology. But the concerns with lighting that we've raised primarily relate to the visual impact, the amount of lighting, and the fact that it would be on 24 hours a day. So it's more the cumulative impact of that lighting being there in association with the use.
Before we move on, if members were minded to give this approval, those issues could be conditioned, couldn't they, Liz? The lighting, landscape, parking, travel plans, all of that.
Potentially to some degree, although, you know, obviously a lot of this is on the plans, so you might have to think about how the conditions are worded, but in theory, some of those issues could be conditioned.
Thank you. Councillor Laming.
Thank you. I am concerned with the anaerobic digester site immediately next to it, because are the tanks for the digestate open to the air, or are they in an enclosed situation? Because whether you like it or not, you do get pollen from those. They're open to the air.
So from looking at the layout plan, I'll just bring up the plan now. The two large grey rectangles at the south are the silage clamps. So they would contain all the waste while it's being processed, but I've been told by the case officer there would be a cover over those. There was also an air quality assessment. So various measures are proposed to control odour from the site, including those covers.
Okay, thank you.
And we have been sent a copy of the new report, which you mentioned, and you were content that that removes that objection. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So that's reason for refusal number 5 to be removed.
Thank you. Councillor Lee?
If I could just follow up on the odour report, I think, did I read it right? It said moderate at the restaurant point. So my question is, what does that mean? This, if that's possible. I appreciate it's quite technical. I mean, it's a question of being offensive or being a health hazard. I mean, the two distinct issues there, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've just brought up the summary, which was in the report. In fact, what the report's saying is it's looked at wind direction, it's looked at the sensitivity of the receptors, so that would be the main restaurant area, and it's looked at the various measures in place on the anaerobic digester, so that being the covers on the silage clamps, for example. So overall, it's concluding an overall negligible risk, given the sensitivity of the receptor. So a residential use, it would take as a higher sensitivity than a restaurant use.
Liz, could I ask the mitigation, the area of extra planting which is proposed between the digester site and the EV charging site? Do we have any information about that as to what is proposed to be planted there? Would that help to mitigate any odour coming across from the?
I think that's mainly for ecological rather than landscape benefits. So it's a bare chalk substrate. So it's going to naturally colonise, and that's the intention. So in terms of screening, that's not going to be of such benefit. It's more there for the ecological enhancement.
And can you just tell me what planning weight we should be putting on issues like the existing planning permission for the county council waste, the basically crushing of large amounts of concrete and stuff that they've got permission for on that site, and also the planning weight that we need to give to our climate emergency policies now?
In terms of the extent waste consent, I think what I would say is if we, as it stands, we have insufficient information to demonstrate whether that is a viable development or not. We've been told that the waste operator, that it's no longer commercially viable for them to use. So I think it's difficult to say without having that further information, basically. So it's not the main issue in this case. So the main issue is obviously the countryside location. So that it would not have, you know, significant weight in this case if it was the only issue alone. But in terms of the climate emergency, it's something we have considered quite in a lot of detail. We've had quite a close look at government policy, but we're also aware of the things like the government strategy, the rapid charging strategy, which proposes to install rapid chargers along A roads and motorways, and to improve network connections at service stations. So we've given that quite significant weight, but also looked at how this fits in with those government objectives.
Thank you.
If I can just add one point, just in terms of the weight, in terms of the county waste and minerals plan. I've spent quite a bit of time looking at this with Dan today, the legal officer, and also the information that's been provided to us. We've got our local plan part 1, we've got a local plan part 2, we've got the Hampshire Minerals and Waste Plan, which is adopted in 2013. The policy team themselves at the county haven't specifically objected, and as you've heard from Liz there, some of other issues you may want to attach much more significant weight to it. And our advice to you is to put the issue of the minerals and waste in the planning balance with all other matters.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Possibly related to that, on page 214, there's a reference to legal opinions submitted by the applicant, which the second bullet says there are no relevant local plan policies and therefore the tilt balance applies. I just wonder if we could have a gloss on what tilt balance means in this context.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think the officers conducted that particular assessment. So if you look at the planning balance and conclusion section, you'll see that on pages 231 and 232. There is a reference to the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, and it's been, if you like, the submission of the applicant in this particular case, that because the local plan, the current local plan that is, not the emerging, the current one, because there is no specific policy which deals with this particular application, i.e. the principle of electric charging vehicle stations, it's the assertion and submission of the applicant here that the tilted balance applies. So you'll see on page 231, the tilted balance, paragraph 11D, this is the National Planning Policy Framework, and it states where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies of which are most important for determining the application are out of date, granting planning permission unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole. Now, the point's been made that there is no specific policy in the current local plan. Therefore, this tilted balance applies. That is, you should go on to grant planning permission unless you can point towards significant and demonstrable harm. So that's how the tilted balance here works. What can be said contrary to the opinion submitted on behalf of the planning application, the assertion of the applicants here is that there is case law which deals with how you apply the tilted balance and whether or not there is a policy, because the thrust of engaging this particular argument is the applicant saying there is no policy here, therefore the tilted balance applies. Now the court gives some guidance on that. The case of Paul Newman Homes Limited, this was actually squarely dealing with paragraph 11D in the tilted balance. It's in the Court of Appeal, and it's Lady Justice Andrews. She gives the leading opinion. She says the first trigger for the application of the tilted balance under paragraph 11D is where there are no relevant development plan policies, the submission in this particular case that the applicant is making. That describes a situation where there is no policy in the development plan that is relevant to the decision whether the application should be granted or refused. Now, she goes on to say, obviously that is wide enough to embrace, by way of example, the scenario where there is no development plan at all, or where there is such a plan, but it predates the 2004 Planning Act, and none of the policies in that might have been relevant or has been saved. She then makes reference to submissions made in the case of Paul Newman Homes on behalf of the Secretary of State. And she says paragraph 11D is concerned with the entire range of applications for which planning consent is required and not just with housing developments. So she makes comment here that, yes, it's relevant because we're not dealing with housing, it's the entire range of applications. Thus, what is relevant in the context of one type of planning application may well be irrelevant in another. Moreover, the number of policies that are relevant will vary from case to case, and it may be that only one or two are truly pertinent to the determination of the application under consideration. She goes on to say, I respectfully agree with the judge that the concept of relevance means that the policy or policies must have a real role to play in the determination of the planning application, but that there is no requirement that it or they should be enough in themselves to enable the decision maker to grant or refuse that application. Relevant does not mean and cannot mean determinative. So the point here is that to construe the tilted balance as having no relevant development plan policy, therefore that there is the tilted balance is applied. She goes on to say, well, you may not specifically have a policy which deals with this application, electric charging vehicle stations, but she says the fact that you don't have a determinative policy is not the point. It's got to be relevant. Now, the officer says MTRA4, the countryside policy, is relevant. It helps you going towards assessing whether or not there's material to grant or refuse here. So in respect to the application and the applicant's legal advice, it's not correct to say that there has to be a determinative policy on this particular point. A local plan can never envisage what comes forward. It just merely has to be relevant. And in this particular case, the relevant policy is obviously MTRA4.
Thank you for that very thorough explanation. Thank you. Right. Are there any more questions to our officer? So I think we're moving into debate, members. Councillor Lee?
Yes, I'd like to echo the Councillor Kearney said. We're in a climate crisis. It's manifest. Yes, we have a shortage of chargers around the country. I think something like 25% are in London, only 11% in the southeast. We have a major arterial route through Winchester. We have a movement strategy. We know that the largest impact in terms of climate effect, carbon emissions, is from transport. There is obviously a need to encourage the uptake of electric vehicles to address pollution issues and the climate crisis. This particular site, with its many charging points and strategically located, can only be of major benefit in that respect. I think also there's some opportunities which are highlighted in terms of the anaerobic digester. The 3 Maids is not very far away. This site looks like it's made for this. There's a grid connection. There is a paucity of those elsewhere. National policy talks about charging points every 20 miles on major networks. Well, you've got to have the charging connection points to achieve that. In this site, it is, oven ready in a sense. So it all, in my mind, makes sense. And therefore, I would be very keen to support this application. Thank you.
Councillor Edwards?
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot to unpick here, but I think we've had a good debate. If we look at page 233, where the recommendation reasons for refusal are set out, I'll just try and touch on each of them one by one and see where that leaves the biggest cherry, as it were, to be considered. On number 5, the smells we've established are no longer a factor. On number 4, we have looked at a brief interaction with the agent. We've talked about parking, and I think established that the number of staff working on the site is going to be relatively small compared with other potential uses, and that we could deal with the parking and staff access issues by negotiation and possibly condition. On number 3, the loss of the planned waste processing site. When I first read this about safeguarding and minerals, I thought the problem was that there was going to be really valuable stuff under the ground. But of course, that's not the case. What we're talking about is the existence of a piece of paper in the form of a planning permission, which was granted in 2020, is unimplemented. There have been questions around the viability of business, and we have heard, I think from our officer, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is at the moment insufficient evidence for us to judge that viability. And it seems to me that putting all that together, we should, plus the fact that there is an existing and fairly recently established similar site operating in Winchester. I'm sorry, literally over the road. Chair glosses, thank you. I think we should give low weight to that objection. The lighting, which is number 2 on the list, we have discussed. We understand that it will be low intensity lighting and that there will be low visibility from outside the site. Something which struck me when I visited the site, although the photographs make it look, as indeed it is, a fairly level field, it is at the southern end significantly sunk beneath the raised level of the A34 and the access road. And since a lot of the lighting, I guess, will be around the service area in the south, the restaurant and so on, I think that the spillage is going to be partly constrained by the site. And to the extent that there are remaining problems, I don't see them being beyond the wit of everyone involved to resolve satisfactorily. And so we come back to the first item appropriately on the list, which is MTRA4 and development in the countryside. Clearly, this is countryside in technical legal terms, but given the importance of this kind of infrastructure, I think we need to think a bit more about what open countryside might mean to us in our real lives. The site has an anaerobic digester under construction immediately to the north, and I was struck by just how massive an engineering project that is, how high the earth banks will be, how dominant the equipment on site. It is, of course, a really important environmental bit of kit that we need to have, but it's big and it's significant and it's not open countryside. To the north, we have getting on for a mile of solar panels adjacent to the A34. Well, we can debate whether solar panels are open countryside or not. They're, I guess, a halfway house. We've got the A34 itself, national transport infrastructure along the edge of the site. And we have, as we heard earlier on, we have a golf facility and other sporting and leisure activities in the near vicinity. And I guess we also have the potential of Winchester itself getting closer to this site with other planning applications that may come forward. So I don't see this as open countryside of a kind and quality and at a location in which its preservation is of the highest importance. That's a subjective assessment, but I think it's a relevant one. We have also heard about the kind of facility that this is going to be, and how it's difficult. I think I'm summarising some of the officer's reports. So again, I may be getting slightly the wrong end of the stick here, but one of the problems seems to be that we don't have a local plan up to date for EV charging. And so it's hard to see whether this would fit into a plan which we might have coming down the road. But the point I would make is that this seems to be a very different kind of component within a necessarily diverse charging infrastructure. to say that there's lots of medium speed charging available in city car parks, or that people are installing charging points outside their houses, doesn't seem to me relevant to the kind of service that this facility would offer. This would provide, I think I'm right in saying, exclusively rapid charging, and it would therefore appeal to people making Winchester their destination or moving on to a destination beyond Winchester. Hopefully, there will be similar facilities 200 miles away from Winchester that Winchester's people can use when they go on long trips. So it's part of a national infrastructure, but it's a really important part. And I think knowing that that surety exists, that if you drive in an EV to Winchester for leisure, for tourism, for business, for, to engage with our economy in any way, you're not going to be stranded here. You're not going to be left in a city car park where you can only get 50 miles on your car while you have your business meeting. That is, it seems to me, a really important benefit, which is not otherwise provided in the city. There are very, very few rapid chargers currently in the city. Well, I've talked perhaps at too much length. The direction, I hope, is clear, that I think we should support this. We should support it because of national infrastructure requirements, and we should support it because of our own climate change emergency declaration and the action plan that follows from that. In my simplistic thinking, an emergency declaration and an action plan means that that is the first hurdle that any proposal has to jump if it's going to be taken forward, and I think this does. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Chair. This does raise quite a few problems in my mind. From a straight logic point of view, the charging station should either be at the existing service station on the A34, which is the logical place for it to be, or close to the M3, which would serve the M3 and that. But putting that aside, we're looking at a site where we've got a solar farm, we've got an anaerobic digester, and we've got a charging station proposed. There should be some logic in joining those three up to get the maximum benefit that the city can get out of it, as well as the locals. At this moment in time, there are three separate things which aren't joined up, or really got any joined up thinking, and that to me is a great shame, because it loses the efficiency of what we can do and what we can achieve. We've also got the problem that there is existing policy, planning permission for a concrete crusher if we don't put this up, which to me sounds a bit like blackmail. And I'm really concerned about the way that we're acting, because if we've got the Hampshire County Council granting permission for an anaerobic digester, how did that come about when the last big anaerobic digester, which we were looking at Sparshall, came under this committee? So I think there's a question to be asked on that, because if we're going to have an infrastructure that takes the environment into concern, we need a lot more joined up thinking. So I will be considering what other people are to say before I make my mind up.
Councillor Reid. Thank you. Yes, I think the MTRA4 issue is dealt with by saying this is a unique position. It's next to a busy A34, which is tantamount to being a motorway anyway, as we all know. It's surrounded on three sides, as you said, Councillor Reid, by other roads. Can be built there now, and it can only be built there. It can't be built anywhere else because this is the only place it's got the electric connection that we need. So I think that that establishes the unique site and the unique need for putting this EV charging station on that particular site. I also think that there is a benefit to local people. We've seen half of Kings Barton built out with no electric vehicle charging points, certainly no public ones, and any that people have, they have to put in themselves in their own. And not everybody there has the place to put in one. So there are hundreds probably of people in the north of Winchester who would use this to charge their electric vehicles, or would get electric vehicles because they then can charge them. All the other issues, I think, are either covered by reports that we've been sent, or we can cover by condition. I will be talking to the officers in a moment about conditions should we decide as a committee to approve this. But certainly some on-site parking for staff, a travel plan, some cycle parking. There is a cycle route that goes just to the east, I think, of this site. It would be good to see a cycle route to this for staff to use from the city. But I am convinced that this is the way forward. We need to decarbonise, and we need to be leaders in this field across the south of England. I think approving this application, we will be seen as leading the way. So, members, I think that's the end of debate. I think we come to the decision. So we need to take two votes if we're going to. Let's this application is. Do you want to do the conditions first? No. This application is recommended for refusal. So can I see those in favour of refusing this application, please? And those against the refusal?
9, Chair.
Okay. So now we need to come up with planning reasons why we would give this planning application, give it approval. Councillor Laming.
I think we do that on the balance of tilt.
Balance of tilt.
Yeah.
Okay, any others, Councillor Reid?
I was just going to say, our legal rep read out a whole host of them.
Okay, let's speak to our officers. You've been listening to the debate.
Thank you, Chair. I've been listening to the debate. It's been really interesting, but it's very clear that what members are saying is they want to put a lot of weight on the unique position that this site affords Winchester, and planning strategy, national guidance is not delivering these sort of sites quick enough. And this site with the connection will enable that to meet local need, destination need for people to come to Winchester. And so it's quite right that you've put a lot of weight on that. Looking at the other issues, looking at reason for refusal 3, you're outweighing that concern with the safeguarding issue there with this. You're also looking carefully at the location, the countryside, and feeling that the site is very well contained, and so that it won't lead to the detriment identified by reason for refusal 2. So those are the reasons that I'm hearing that we're allowing the planning permission.
And do we have some planning conditions that we can agree?
Yes, just checking a minute at the reasons that the members would like to give permission, as I just summarised. Just checking it's minuted. Thank you very much. Okay, so the conditions that we've looked at, we would have some fairly sort of standard conditions, and I've been listening to the things that are of interest or concern to members also. So we would start with our expiry date, 3-year permission to implement it within. We would set out some additional documents in our approved plan list. We would be looking at the materials, samples, facing materials. We would normally want to see those submitted to us in full prior to development commencing above the damp proof course. There's some standard conditions that we would need in respect to drainage, disposal of foul and surface water. We'd want to look at timetables for implementation of those matters and management and maintenance, full package treatment plants for drainage fields, details like that to be submitted to us. Highways, it would be important that we understand the layout of the parking, who that is for in terms of the workers to ensure that the most spaces are available. We also would need to look at a transport plan, a cycling provision, and how staff would be getting to this site. Another one would be local connections for major applications, and applications like this, we'd normally want to ensure there was local connections for employment. So we would attach that condition. We'd want to make sure that any works to our adopted highway are dealt with appropriately through a section 278. So there's a condition that would ensure that no development takes place until we got those details in. We'd then want to couple that to make sure that within the visibility space, because quite a lot of car use, that there isn't any planting that's going to make that a highway safety issue. There's a number of trees on site, so we would want a raft of standard conditions to protect those trees from construction and ensure that they're sort of the lifetime of them for the permission. Landscaping details as well, planting specifications, that sort of thing, details and layout. I think the question is whether you would want us to approve this for the signage that the applicant has proposed, but I considered that you said it was well within the site, so we should leave that as is, in the lighting strategy, if you're happy with that. The reason we recommended was just the general proliferation, but if you think it's acceptable and it's contained within the site, then we can leave that as it is. So if you want to recommend anything else, just one moment.
So are we content with the proposed signage and lighting?
Yeah.
Yes? So that's all. Councillor Lee?
Sorry, it was a thought about the mix of rapid charges versus even faster charges. I can't remember the mix. Arguably, if as an electric vehicle driver, I want to be charging on the most rapid. So what is there a minimum number we may want to specify? We certainly don't want the lower charging rates. We want the more rapid, high rapid if need be.
I think they're all rapid from what
I think they're all rapid, so.
So we can't ask for some that are more than rapid or a better mix. Sorry to be difficult, because if I'm in a rush, I might want the 10 minutes rather than half an hour or whatever.
It's a commercial operation. They will put in what they think is going to be most.
It's a decision for you to make today. The business model is as set out. So if you find that acceptable, we find that acceptable.
So those conditions, as laid out by Mrs. Hutchins, will be delegated to officers and to me to approve with your acceptance. So with that, if you're happy for us to go back and look at all those. Thank you. All right. So with those conditions as set out to be confirmed, can I see all those in favour of approving this planning application? Okay, thank you very much. That application is approved then, thank you, with the conditions and everything else we've said. We'll now take a 10-minute comfort break, folks, and start again at 20 past. Thank you. Right, let's return to our agendas. So the next item on today's planning committee is item number 12 at Bowland House on West Street in Alresford, and it's to change the existing commercial building into a healthcare practice, change of use. And our presenting officer is Megan Osborne. Welcome, Megan, and if you'd like to give us your presentation, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Everyone hear me all right? The application site is located within Alresford town centre and situated around the back of the buildings that front onto West Street. Bowland House is located within Alresford Conservation Area and surrounded by a number of listed buildings, but it's not listed itself. The access to the site is from West Street, a vehicular access leading to the courtyard area with some parking spaces. The existing building is currently vacant and has a use class for a showroom and an office. The proposal is for the change of use of the building to a healthcare facility and consultant rooms. This is showing the existing and proposed elevations of the building. You can see there are no changes proposed to the elevations. And this is again showing the existing and proposed floor plans, and there are no changes proposed to the floor plans of these buildings. This is a photo of the existing building and a photo of the access in between these two buildings to Bowland House at the rear of them. This application is for the change of use from offices and showroom to a healthcare service. All of these uses fall into the use class E and would therefore not normally require planning permission for the change of use. The reason that this needs planning permission is that there has been a condition imposed on the original application of this building as a showroom and office to restrict the building to these uses only. There are no objections in terms of highways, historic environment and environmental protection. It is therefore considered that this application is acceptable for the reasons as set out in my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Megan. We now move to the public speaking. And the first public speaker is Andrew White, who is an objector. If you'd like to come forward, Mr. White. The microphone is switched on by pressing the button at the bottom of it. And you will have 3 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and councillors. This response is not just my own, it represents the views of the 9 owners of properties within Styles Yard, who also own the land throughout the yard and outside Bowland House. Our reasons for objecting to the planning application fall into 2 main categories. The first, danger to pedestrians and traffic in the entrance to the yard and within the yard. And the second, the serious inconvenience to owners and residents within the yard. A medical practice will generate far more footfall than an office with its half-hour changeovers. The entrance to Styles Yard is extremely narrow, as you saw in that photograph, and also requires crossing the busy West Street pavement. We know that pedestrians are often unaware of the entrance, and so even experienced drivers need to exercise extreme caution when entering or leaving the yard. When arrivals and departures coincide, this can require vehicles to reverse into the busy West Street and sometimes into the pedestrian crossing area. West Street itself has few vacant parking spaces during the working day. Members submitted objections to the proposal, which there were nearly 20, on major concerns regarding parking and the difficulties of vehicles and pedestrians entering and leaving the yard. The practice has stated that therefore allocated parking places will only be used for staff and disabled customers. This will present them with difficulties in terms of enforcement, as clients will need to be forewarned about the lack of parking for those who, as they will, choose to try and find somewhere to park within the yard. This whole issue will become even more difficult as and when the practice expands. The office building can accommodate 8 healthcare professionals in separate offices, a large increase over the current proposal, 3, quite apart from any visiting support and supplier staff by cars. Provision of disabled parking will only work if it replaces a staff parking place. Any parking beyond the 4 marked spaces always creates serious problems for residents of the yard because turning spaces are so tight. The only possible parking is either on the land owned by the residents of Style Yard or on access routes for the residents and the back of the Broad Street shops. Any double parking.
I'm afraid that's the end of your time. But if you wouldn't mind just waiting and seeing if members have got some questions of clarification. Members? Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you, Chair. You stated earlier on that you thought there might be 8 practitioners, but I understood there were 3.
8 offices.
And you're saying that they could all be accommodating a practitioner each.
Well, I guess if you've got 8 offices, you could have 8 practitioners.
So that's an assumption then, not a statement of fact.
But if you only wanted 3 practitioners, why would you take a building that has 8 offices?
I have no idea. Thank you.
I would suggest that they intend to expand.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. White, you said that you and other close residents own that land and the access to it. Do the users of this office have existing permission to have four parking spaces?
Yes, they do, yeah.
So that's an existing, and you're used to having the incumbents of 4 offices coming and going with their cars into that yard.
Well, the thing is, there's a difference between an office block as it is currently designated, the amount of use that people who work in offices have as against a medical practice where there'll be much.
I understand there'll be probably more people walking in there, but the only parking.
Yeah.
It's conditioned that the only parking is for staff.
They only have 4 spaces with that office, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. No more questions? Thank you very much indeed. You may return to your seat if you could. Thank you, that's great. Thank you. The next speaker is the ward councillor, Councillor Power. Councillor Power, you know this. That's it. You've got 5 minutes from when you start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I'll take that time. You have seen the picture of the entrance to the yard. You've seen on the plan that it is a dog leg, and you can see that on page 271 of your papers. It may not be apparent that there is a pedestrian crossing just to the left of that entrance on the built-out area, and it may not be apparent that despite all the pedestrian footpaths in that location, the only way in and out of Styles Yard is for both vehicles and pedestrians is via that dogleg. And of course, we have a very busy pavement in front of the access to that yard. So we already have tensions because you cannot actually see vehicles coming out when you're going in. You have vehicles backing out into West Street. And I wish you'd been able to see it on a busy Saturday. It's not going to be easy. So I find it slightly concerning that Hampshire County Council don't see this as a problem. We're going to have quite a large increase on the number of pedestrians as well as the vehicles. And I want you to contrast this for a moment with the access to the Alresford Tip, where you have very clear visibility going in and out. only 3 parking spaces inside the tip, yet Hampshire have decreed that it is unacceptable that pedestrians and cars should be allowed to access the tip at the same time, which I find quite ridiculous. Condition 4 does recognise this problem. However, I'm not content that it actually mitigates the risk, and I would ask members of the committee to ask officers if there is anything else we can do to protect pedestrians on the footway, and those the members of the public are the real concern to me. It's not just the houses that take their vehicles into there, it also provides parking for the pub and for the flower shop, which is 2 parking spaces. It is a very busy little entrance. And of course, residents understandably are concerned about how this will be enforced. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Members, do we have any questions? Councillor Laming.
Thank you. I understand precisely what your problem is with parking issues, but when we've got condition 4, where it says that there is space for allocated parking spaces for staff and disabled, that means that there won't be anybody visiting as such. They have to use the street.
May I, Chairman? Thank you. You cannot assume that one practitioner will go in the morning and come out in the evening. Practitioners tend to be self-employed. They may work half days, full days. The disabled space, assuming 10 disabled spaces, 10 disabled patients a day, that would be 10 ins and 10 outs. I don't understand the statement that there is a negligible increase in the number of vehicular movements. And also, of course, if you've got 3 or 4 treatment rooms, you have another 60 pedestrian movements in that same very tight space. I don't see a solution to it. I want the building to be back in use, but I'm not content that we have properly protected both pedestrians who are not using that facility and pedestrians that will be using it.
Where would the staff park if they can't park there? Where's the nearest full-day parking spot?
All day parking is at Albury Park, and you can have a parking permit from Winchester City Council. The cost, the last time I checked, was £280 a year.
Yeah, but how far is that from the practice? So
300 yards of that order. It's a 5-minute walk or less, depending on how many people you meet on the way.
Yeah, I'm really trying to understand the parking problems. I can see that there are. It's just how it can be mitigated if we went.
There is also some day parking at the station car park, which is slightly closer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Laming asked my question. Thank you.
Outrageous. Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Councillor Power, to your knowledge, have vehicles going in and out ever got stuck in there, and have they ever damaged the buildings on either side, to your knowledge?
I believe there has been some damage to the flower shop. It is very tight, and I wouldn't want to be driving. I certainly wouldn't try and take the town minibus through there, and I can see that an ambulance would have some difficulty.
Councillor Lee.
Yeah, apologies. I drove past, but I didn't have a chance to drive in. So lucky I might have not gone out. But I'm presuming there's turning space. So you could, if a car went in and parked, it could somehow do a 3-point turn if you're dexterous enough to then come out without having to reverse out into West Street. That was my first question. My second one is, are there any mirrors there? And would strategic place mirrors ease the problem in your view?
I can't see where mirrors would help in this case. The reason you have to reverse into West Street is because you turn in to the entrance, you find there's somebody coming out, They may have a car behind them, so the obvious solution is to reverse into West Street. There is turning space. There's turning space inside Styles Yard. It's not particularly tight, but the problem arises when two people are coming out and one is going in.
Can I ask Councillor Power, is there already warning signage either inside the yard or outside on the walls, warning pedestrians and drivers of hazards?
Not as far as I know, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I think that's the end of your questions. Thank you. And our next public speaker is the supporter, James Nuttall, who I hope can answer some more of those questions. Thank you, Mr. Nuttall. You switch on the microphone with the button at the bottom. Perfect. And from when you start speaking, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. I'm James Nuttall. I'm the applicant for this proposed change of use. Firstly, I'd just like to give a little background about the application. Bowland House itself is currently fitted out as an office space. It's been on the open market in search of a tenant for the space for around the last 18 months, and it's sat vacant for over a year. During that time, there has been no interest expressed from any new office tenants, which I think is reflective of the wider level of demand for office space in the economy. As an existing commercial space, Bowland House has the potential to provide a very valuable contribution to the local Alresford economy. Our plan is to create a multidisciplinary, independent healthcare facility serving patients from both the town itself and the surrounding areas. Currently, the closest equivalent service is based in Winchester, which requires a significant amount of travel for local residents. Turning specifically to the objections that have been received, as far as I can tell, these are all based on the impact to the residents of Styles Yard, who share this access road with Bowland House. I'd firstly like to take the opportunity to thank the residents who've expressed their views on the application. I haven't personally lived in the yard or regularly travelled into it before, and the difficulties faced by those that do were not apparent when we made the application. Having reviewed the issue in light of those objections, we are very happy to agree to the restriction to the parking in the yard as per the recommended condition. Specifically, this would mean that parking will be permitted only for 3 staff members alongside 1 accessible space. This will have the effect of reducing vehicle movements below the level that is currently approved with the existing office space, and should therefore lead to an improvement in the access situation for the residents when compared with what is currently permitted. I hope, therefore, that this can address their concerns. In summary, I think this use will allow an existing but neglected part of Alresford's commercial ecosystem to be revitalised and provide an important new service to the local population, but in a way that is sympathetic to their concerns. And just very quickly, just on something that was mentioned earlier in terms of the 8 rooms, I think there are 8 rooms in total in the building, but obviously we need a waiting room, an administration space. There's no possible way we could ever have 8 treatment rooms in there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for keeping to your time. Councillor Edwards, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. You said that you would be willing to comply with the suggested restrictions. Would you also be prepared to have a communications policy which would ensure that all your users were aware that there was no parking available for them on site, and that they should make other arrangements, and that disabled parking would be available only if previously arranged?
Yes, so we would already be planning to have, firstly on our website, in the section about getting to the practice, very clear instructions as to the parking availability, i.e. that there is no customer parking available in Styles Yard, and please not to enter Styles Yard. Also, the vast majority of appointments would likely be booked over the telephone, so that would be a part of the policy, to explain to patients over the phone that there is no parking. And then finally, any automated booking confirmations, emails, etc., would reiterate that point again. I should stress
it's in our interest to do that, because if a patient drives in and there's no parking and they have to drive out again, firstly, they'll probably be late for the appointment, which is a disaster, and also all of the issues in terms of reversing out and everything. It's in nobody's interest. So we would want to draw this to their attention as much as possible.
And may I have a second question subsidiary to that? Do you, as a actual or potential tenant, I'm not sure, of potential tenant, would you have any rights to signage on the street face? And could you use that to make clear that there was no parking available?
So we would potentially only own the freehold of the building and the parking spaces. So we wouldn't have any right. We just have a right of way over the access. Obviously, I don't actually know who owns that particular aspect. It might be that it's in everyone's interest to get some signage put there, but I wouldn't have the ability to do that.
But you could explore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And again, we would want to explore that because it's in our interest to make it as clear as possible.
I've just been speaking to the officer about the possibility of including some form of signage in one of the conditions. So let's have final questions. Councillor Reid and then Councillor Laming.
Thank you, Chair. The fact that the 3 of the 4 parking spaces are going to be taken by practitioners, and the last one is going to be left presumably for someone who has a disability, how can you judge that you don't have 2 disabled people in the same period of time?
So the space will be bookable by patients at the point of making the appointment. So if somebody books an appointment and requests the space and it's not available, they would be advised accordingly. And then either, depending on the nature of the disability, they would either park more locally and make arrangements to get to the practice, or find an alternative time when the space is available for them.
Councillor Laming.
Thank you. How many sort of deliveries are you expecting a day? And the reason I ask that is because most couriers arrive in transit style vehicles, which are that same size as the communal bus, which would have difficulty getting up there and turning.
It's not an especially delivery heavy industry. So we would normally expect to have a couple of deliveries a week, I would have thought, for supplies to the building. Other items generally tend to be quite a lot smaller, so I'd be posted. So there wouldn't be an enormous quantity of deliveries throughout the day.
Probably wise to warn your suppliers, however, that they won't be able to get their larger vans in, or even their smaller ones, probably. Okay, any more questions, members? So thank you very much indeed. Mr. Nuttall, if you'd like to return to your seat, that's great. So Megan, do you want to add anything following those discussions?
Thank you, Chair.
Nope. Okay. So questions on the whole report, members? There are no questions. We move to debate. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a ticklish one. I know the site reasonably well, and it is a problem without a shadow of a doubt, because if you start to drive in, because of the dog leg, you can't actually see what's coming out. And backing out onto West Street is extremely dangerous. And I think it's really a health and safety issue. And I think Hampshire County Council haven't got it right. We've heard of it from the ward councillor of another site which has put in a restriction. Here, I think whilst the building itself is in perfect use, the approach to it, the mixture of traffic and pedestrian, is unacceptable. I unfortunately won't be voting in support of this particular application.
Well, if there's nobody else, thank you for that, Councillor Reid. I know the area and in fact driven past to check the width of that access, and it is very narrow. But in planning terms, we cannot use the fact that it's a very narrow access as a reason for refusal, because it's got an existing office use which has got 4 parking spaces attached to it. And that means that, you know, we have to accept that that's the existing use and we can't object to this on the basis of the existing use. So I think that's the compromise that has been agreed, that 3 of those spaces should be specifically for staff and the 4th be a bookable disabled space, is a very acceptable compromise. I am going to propose that we add to condition 4 that some suitable signage should be added within the red line area to warn both drivers and pedestrians to be extra careful when exiting and entering, as much as we can do that. With that addendum, I am content to support the officer recommendation. So can we hear? Oh, Councillor Gordon Smith, you have a contribution to debate.
Yes, I would reiterate what's been said about the entrance. It's an absolute nightmare. I think on the planning committee, we've seen Hampshire say things are perfectly acceptable, and you begin to wonder what disagreements, should we say. There's a problem with putting up signs. The 2 adjacent buildings are owned by, have different owners at the entrance, and it's in a conservation area. And also the flower shop have had their wall hit a number of times. So I don't think they're going to be particularly, you know, prepared to play ball, shall we say. I do have my slight doubts about this condition about only having pedestrians coming in there. Is that actually workable, in fact?
Lily.
I've been drawing pictures of small cars in this area, and I've been putting positions of where cameras might be. I just wonder whether is there not a technical solution to indicate when a vehicle is moving and providing some turning space, which might just ameliorate the situation. I'm no expert, but I don't know.
I'm not sure that's something we could condition.
Well, there are experts, I'm sure. Do that.
Okay, I will pass over to our planning officer to give us a suggestion.
Thank you, Chair. In respect of condition 4, I'm thinking that we say prior to the first use of the proposal hereby permitted, a plan and details shall be submitted showing allocated parking spaces and cycling spaces or parking for staff and disabled parking, and the management arrangements also, which might lead to various innovations and ideas in constrained area, shall be submitted to and approved in writing, etc., etc. And we could also add an element that says details of signage to ensure pedestrian safety from manoeuvring cars in the parking area. So these are sort of quite broad statements which would enable us to look at some solution in terms of signage or digital innovation, something like that, with the owners to try to improve it as much as possible. Fundamentally, however, I think it's acceptable because parking is proposed. As a planning authority, we would be looking at this with no parking, and it would be acceptable also because it's in a sustainable solution position. So there is that to think about as well. Thanks.
Conditions. So if there's no more debate, we will move to the decision. So this application is recommended to be approved. Can I see all those in favour of approval, please?
7, Chair.
Those against?
2, Chair.
Thank you very much. So that is approved with that extra bit on the condition 4. Thank you. So now we turn to the next item on our agenda and the last item on our agenda, which is item number Lovely. So we now move to the final item on our agendas today, which is agenda item 13, which is a protected tree application. And it is at 38 Mead End Road in Denmead, Waterlooville. And our presenting officer is John Bartlett. So if you'd like to give us your presentation, please, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the application concerns 4 oak trees that are to the rear of 38 Mead End Road. The trees have been implicated in a subsidence claim to in terms of the conservatory. We have passed this matter on to our arboricultural consultant to look at as well, our appointed arboricultural consultant, who we use for these type of applications. And what you can see here is an isometric sketch that illustrates the damage to the conservatory. The most damage is at markers 6 and 7, where movement of up to 34 millimeters has been noted. So the map shows the group of trees which are to the rear of 38 Mead End Road. These trees are clearly visible from the public domain in Mead End Road, and also from other roads such as Little Corner that are to the rear there. And this is to the front of 38 Mead End Road, a screen of mature oak trees, forming a row and a screen between the surrounding properties. Now, the proposed work is very drastic. It will have a significant impact on the landscape and the trees themselves. The exact specification is in Appendix 1 on the report, which gives the measurements for the reduction in terms of meters to the height and to the side of the trees. We're looking at up to in the region of 4 meter reduction up from the height of the trees, and between 2 to 3 meters on the sides, which equates to a 70% volume reduction and 30% linear or radial reduction. This is just another view from the side of 36 Little Corner. Having considered the report from our arboricultural consultant, he has concluded that we'd be open to a financial liability of £75,000 if this application is refused. And we had detailed discussions with our legal team on this. We've looked at all of the options, and unfortunately, we've concluded that we can only recommend that this application be permitted. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We now move to public speaking. And our first speakers are the objectors, Patrick and Karen Curran. If you'd like to come forward. You will have 3 minutes between you from when you start speaking, and the microphones are switched on by pressing the button. Perfect. So when you're ready. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, current councillors. We have lived in Denmead since 1989, and those trees have been there many, many years before we came. I realise the significant financial implications involved with the local authority, but nevertheless, I think it's important that we do make our objections very clear, and that is the fact that the removal of the trees, to the extent that it's going to be detrimental to the visual impact provided by the trees. A reduction of 70% to us seems excessive, and it's going to be possibly detrimental to the survival of the trees. Now, I'm not tree surgeon or technologist, but it does seem to reduce trees by 70%. There's not going to be much left of the remaining 30%. The only damage is to the conservatory, and the consequences of the building conservatory so close to the building should have been considered at the time when the purchase was made, in our view. Trees capture carbon. They are becoming increasingly important in the fight against climate change, and that's been discussed already with electric vehicles. So there's not a great deal of imagination to see the connection there. The trees are part of the original boundary of the farm. They give character to the area and make it a pleasant place to live. There have been a number of planning applications over the years to reduce the crown of the trees, the length of the branches, and branches themselves. It can be inferred that this application is an attempt to remove the trees by stealth. The trees provide shelter and food for wildlife. The trees are important for local recreation and to look at and appreciate, as well as supplementing the existing infrastructure for local children. The trees are very close to a public road and also a bridle path, and there is also a children's play area close by. The trees give character to our estate. They provide clean air. The trees promote health and encourage people to enjoy nature. In conclusion, in our view, it would be detrimental if the trees were reduced completely by 70%. That is my case.
I agree with everything he said. It's to look out of your house or to walk by, and for those trees then to be gone is not good. It gives character to the area, makes it enjoyable to live there.
Thank you very much indeed. So if you just pause, are there any questions of clarification, members? I think you've made a very, Councillor Lee.
I think you said you lived there since 1989. And can you just say when the conservatory was put in? Was it there when you arrived, or any idea?
We don't know. It's only we've become aware of this conservatory when we saw the planning application to reduce the trees, and we then looked into it. But we don't know when the conservatory was built. We do know that the house was built 1980 something or later than that, so don't know. But there have been a number of planning applications to reduce the crown of the trees, as my husband said. So.
And are you aware that the trees having had tree surgery and attention in the last few decades?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Certainly since we've been there. I don't have the dates in front of me, but certainly, yes, since we've been there, there's been a number of applications.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your eloquent defence of the trees. If you'd like to switch off the microphone and return to your seats now, thank you. Okay, now we have the Parish Council representative, Councillor Kevin Andrioli. Welcome again. And you know the routine, so you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking, Councillor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. Thank you again for letting me speak. The arboricultural appraisal included in the application states that one or more of the 4 trees has caused the problem, and the recommended tree works may be subject to change upon receipt of additional information. Other vegetation recorded presents future risk to the building stability, and management is therefore recommended. So 1 tree caused the problem, but all 4 must be cut back. The report also suggests that had an application been submitted to remove the trees, it would have not been approved. Instead, an application by stealth has been submitted for a reduction of 70 to 90% which is highly likely to kill the trees and thus obtain the result of removal. This is death by 1,000 cuts to these trees, almost literally. The report also states that the foundation depth of the property is 1.2 meters. On Denmead clay, foundations are less than 2.4 meters always cause problems. So the subsidence claim appears to be solely on the conservatory extension and not to the main property. So the cause of the subsidence is the inadequate foundation installed by the builder of the conservatory. The application calls for a triennial maintenance cycle. Such a cycle on an oak tree is excessive. The tree will not grow back sufficiently in 3 years to warrant this work. The trees are part of the old field boundary, as you've heard, and so form an important nature corridor for bats and many other species, and therefore vital to the biodiversity in the climate emergency as declared by Winchester City Council. Works to the trees will be detrimental on the local amenity as the trees are an important part of the street scene. The cost of reducing the trees in the long term is likely to be similar to the cost of work to support the building. The proposed works, which the property owner does not support, they were put in by his insurance company, not him, are extremely excessive pruning, and it should be noted that this level of works effectively becomes pollarding and not pruning. Denmead Parish Council considers it extraordinary that any respectable arboriculturalist would suggest this amount of work. And Denmead Parish Council asks that you reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have the ward councillor. Oh no, we have questions of clarification. I beg your pardon, members. Councillor Lee.
Thank you for that. That's very eloquent. Can you elucidate on whether you've seen more than one estimate about how to deal with the problem? Is it just one archaeologist who's given his report, or have you had several?
Well, there's the application has been apparently put forward by an arboriculturalist on behalf of the insurers. We are aware that Winchester's consultant has been consulted. We normally use him as well, but we haven't in this case. But the fact the application or the detail talks about one tree causing the problem, or possibly more, and that they want to cut all 4 very heavily. And as previous speakers have said, there have been many applications over the years to prune these trees. And the implication was, if they thought they would have got away with it, they would have asked for them all 4 to be cut down. There was a question about the conservatory. It obviously was added. I can't remember how many years ago, but it's fair time after the house was built. But those trees are probably 150 years old.
If there are no further, Councillor Gordon-Smith, thank you.
The damage has been done solely to the conservatory then?
That's our understanding, yes.
Right.
The conservatory has been built at right angles to the rear of the house towards the trees.
Thank you very much. You may return to your seat. So now we have the ward councillor, Councillor Paula Langford-Smith. Good afternoon, Paula. You know how to switch on the microphone. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Councillors, the application before you is to reduce the crown of 4 mature oak trees by 70 to 90%. This amount of pollarding will result in the death of those trees. This council has declared not only a climate emergency, but also a nature emergency. So I ask you to consider not only their significant visual amenity, but their contribution to carbon removal from our ever-warming planet. They cool the air and provide vital habitat for wildlife. It takes about 450 mature trees to offset the carbon emissions of 1 person per year, and the loss of these trees will damage the underground fungal network and mean that the 31 species of mammals supported by oak trees lose their homes. I ask you to reject this application based on the nature emergency, but also to consider that the conservatory at this address has been built long after the trees were planted, and it was built without sufficient foundations. The report states that it has foundations of 1.2 metres. Winchester's own building control staff say that building on clay soils need footings of 2.4 metres. So the footings for this conservatory are less than half of what building regs require. So the application is asking for your approval of poor workmanship and the sacrifice of mature trees when we have both a climate and nature emergency. I ask that you stand up for the trees and stand up for the nature emergency that we are facing, and say to the insurance company that they have insured a building that has insufficient footings. Please refuse this application, which the officer has rightly advised will have a significant detrimental impact on the landscape. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Paula. Any questions of clarification, members? Councillor Lee.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm curious to know, I'm just following on from my previous question, are we aware of any other considerations, obviously underpinning the conservatory with different techniques? For example, footings is footings, but there are other techniques to stabilize a reasonably light frame. I guess it's quite a light frame building. So are you aware of any investigations in that respect?
I don't believe that any have been done. There are none included in the reports.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Reid.
Chairman, do we know the footing depth of the actual main house? The reason I ask this, over the years that I've been on the planning committee, footings have got deeper and deeper and deeper. Are we looking at shallow footings, what we consider shallow footings now, actually on the bungalow?
There have been investigations done where walls have been subsiding and garages have been subsiding, and not only have the clay soil been found to be an issue, but lack of cement in the mortar mix has been a problem on this estate, and also most of the building footings are 1.2 metres.
Thank you. No more questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
So, Mr. Bartlett, do you have anything to add after public contributions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We fully appreciate the significant impact this will have on the amenity value of the trees. We're not denying that at all. What our recommendation is based on is the financial liability that the council will be exposed to should this application be refused. Regulation 24 states that if loss or damage has been established as being caused, then the person subject to other factors be entitled to compensation from the authority. So with that regulation, we are liable if that application is refused, but we fully appreciate that it's an unfortunate impact on the trees concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, do you have questions on the report? Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't the first time that this committee has had to consider very similar cases, and it's always very emotionally as well as practically difficult when you're dealing with 150 odd year old oak trees. But we seem to be in a very binary situation here, where either we do exactly what the insurance company says, or else we have to pay what they say the damage represent. Is there no way in which we can challenge the assessment made by the arboriculturalists, presumably working for the insurance company, in which we can have a dialogue to try and say, is it really all 4 trees? Is it really 70%? I'm sure you've thought about all this, and I'm not saying anything new, but it will be helpful to hear it in committee.
Yeah, thank you, councillor. It is one of these situations, you quite rightly say, where we're put under the proverbial sword of Damocles, I think is the best way to put it. The problem we have is, of course, we've instructed our own arborist, and our own arborist concedes that these trees are implicated. So it'd be very difficult to obviously resist any liability when our own expert arborist has conceded that point. That's the first thing. The second thing is the regulation is quite detailed here. It goes on to look at circumstances and factors that you can take into account. And I think it's right that you're fully versed with what that regulation says. It says compensation. If on a claim under this regulation, a person establishes that loss or damage has been caused or incurred in consequence of the refusal of any consent required under these regulations. Now, the first point is an argument about liability. Has it been established that there is loss or damage here? Now, the technical report submitted by the underwriters have gone on to do soil surveys. There is soil desiccation, what we call seasonal move, with the uptake of moisture during the seasonality, and then you see on the actual report the movement of that conservatory. So there is soil desiccation, which suggests that the roots are close. There was, and then boreholes taken in the locality, not only of the conservatory, but also of the main building and the foundations of the main building. The boreholes were then sent away, wrapped in cling film, and roots were identified in those samples. The roots in this particular instance suggest that they're of the species Quercus, which is oak. It's right to say that not a particular oak was identified, but suffice it to say the species was. So in those boreholes, you have the roots showing underneath those particular foundations. Not only the soil desiccation, you've also got the damage. You can see in the photos that there is a lean towards the actual conservatory as well. So what has been submitted by the underwriter, the loss adjusters, has been, if you like, the correct procedure that you would expect to, one, identify the cause here in that particular instance, and the cause on a balance of probabilities, that is to say, more likely than not, are the trees. Now, going back to the original point, if on a claim under this regulation, a person establishes that loss or damage has been caused as a consequence of the refusal, then that person shall be entitled to compensation from the authority. If you refuse today, that gives the automatic right to appeal. So it may not be the case that they will go to law. It may be that the loss adjuster will try other avenues. They may go to appeal, for example, at the planning inspectorate on a tree works consent refusal. And hopefully the issues will play out there before an inspector. But the problem is that won't be within your gift. You won't contain control then. So if you do refuse, it opens up the avenue for liability. There are arguments that can be made to reduce the potential claim that is being put forwards. I think it's in the region here of about 75,000, whereas the works to the current damage are in the sum of 9,000. I think, John, correct me if I'm wrong. So the potential current works are 9,000 vis-a-vis. If you refuse it, it will require underpinning and remedial structural foundational work in the sum of 75,000. So there's a window between 9 and 75 where arguments about foreseeability, that you did not mitigate your loss by obviously instructing builders who were arguably contributing to the downfall here of this particular building. So there is a window where those arguments can be made. However, the council will still be put to cost, and it's difficult to foresee what those arguments will be. Not only that, there'll be legal costs as well, instructing our own legal professionals, as well as if we are not successful, the costs of the other side is there. So the window of 9,000 to 75,000 could be a lot more if it goes to law and we have to foot the bill for obviously legal costs. So that's the gist of it. That's where we are in terms of the regulations. But if there's any other questions, I can try my best to answer.
Councillor Lamy, you have a question?
Yeah, carrying on from that, surely the owner of the property has some duty to take some responsibility for buying somewhere which is close to a tree, because that's the nature of trees, isn't it? And particularly when you're on a clay subsoil. So therefore, why should we, as an authority, have to bear the whole brunt where he should take some responsibility himself?
It's exactly my point, Councillor. So if you refuse it, those arguments can be made. The regulations do go on to say that no compensation shall be payable to a person for loss or damage reasonably foreseeable by that person and attributable to that person's failure to take reasonable steps to avert the loss or damage to mitigate its extent. So the arguments that the council can put forward will be in that vein. You instructed a contractor, they didn't do the necessary investigations. Therefore, we say it was reasonably foreseeable that you did not mitigate your loss here. However, as I say, we can't put a quantum as to how the tribunal will assess that. Suffice it to say, there will be a period of this is the ultimate claim, and the tribunal will then mitigate it down because they didn't mitigate their loss. So you'll still ultimately be liable. The ramification of your decision is that you've caused the council and the public purse to be put at expense, but it's very, very difficult at this stage to say what that quantum will be. It will be for a tribunal to say, well, actually, you contributed to your own negligence by 25%, therefore the costs and the compensation should be reduced accordingly. It's very, very difficult to say what that would be.
Councillor Lee?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, if I may. Did you say the Quercus evidence was also in the borehole samplings for the main building as well as the conservatory, or just the conservatories?
It was found on the conservatory borehole. So the boreholes have shown the routes and the boreholes taken actually show it at the point where the trial pits are. So in the particular underwriter mapping of where they took the boreholes, it shows a black and white box illustrating boreholes close to the conservatory, boreholes close to the main building, and they were actually implicated.
And I don't know how this plays into what you just said. There is old school thinking and there's then new school thinking. There are buildings that are built without footings. In other words, they have a frame and piles at the key points, and therefore you don't then, if you're close to a tree, have the same undermining problem as is evidenced from what we're saying. So presumably these trees impact on the conservatory could be ameliorated by using new modern techniques. And I just wonder how that would play into any arguments.
The problem is the situation at the particular point in time. I think the property was bought in mid-1980s. At some point from then, the conservatory was added. So the conservatory was probably added in line with the technology at that particular point in time. So already we're what? Arguably 30 years prior to what you're thinking about now. So you have to take the situation as is presented. It's a fair point to say that in the future, you can use different technologies. However, the situation is the conservatory was built from a point in time around about 1986, I think the purchase was made. So from there, the conservatory was added. The court will assess, or the tribunal will assess, the actual conservatory at that particular point in time and how that conservatory can be underpinned or in some way structurally made safe as a result of the trees not having been pruned as a result of your decision.
Very quickly, please.
The right of the tree, of course, is not grounded in law. But here we have a venerable tree, which is considerably old. The ecosystem goods and services that we all are benefiting from these trees is manifest. Is there any precedent or is there any argument that we brought to bear, given the climate change crisis, given our nature emergency, given all the other things we know about the state of nature reductions that we're all experiencing?
I'm afraid we're left with the regulations. The law is the law. There's simply the tree regulations of 2012. Yes, you know, there's 10 years on. This regulation is still good law. If central government doesn't see it fit to amend the law in light of all of the direction towards the green agenda, how we see and promote, you know, healthy lifestyles and healthy environments, I'm afraid the law is the law and we've just had to apply it and advise you accordingly.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. The oak trees, if they're trimmed down, ground. How will that affect the growth of the root system? Because as the trees start going to bud again, they grow much more heavily than prior to any lopping. The damage is the roots, and the roots are looking for water. And due to the climate change, will this work actually solve the problem?
Well, pruning to this volume before can lead to gaps closing up when it's carried out. I mean, we won't be able to fully see the impact until the work is carried out. However, that's yeah, it's kind of questionable as to what impact that would have, but it's seen that we have to that pruning would be justified by our agricultural consultant.
But it's not fair to say that the roots have already reached the outer part of the structure. There's nothing to stop the roots from continually growing, is there?
Well, there won't be as much of a demand on the root system to grow further outwards because there'll be less of a demand on the crown, which will be smaller than before, so there'll be less of a leaf surface area to support. But the cycle, if the application is permitted, the cycle would be a tyrannical cycle of every three years. That will lead to the trees becoming quite bushy, lots of epicormic growth. But this is seen as the best way forward, and our consultant views this as justified in the circumstances.
Is this another question, Councillor Laming?
Thank you, Chair. If we go to this radical pruning, surely that loses the whole essence of the tree and the way it would normally look. It would just become a ball of leaves.
Yes, it will have a significant impact on the trees, their natural appearance and their health. We can't deny that. So they will look significantly different compared to before with their amenity value and their health. But yeah, again, we're going back to Regulation 24 in terms of the reason for recommending this approval.
Yeah, just a quick supplementary. You're looking at all the oak trees where it appears just one is causing the problem. Is that correct?
So it's one or more oak trees have been implicated. Again, there's a whole group of oak trees there. It hasn't definitely been established beyond reason that it's all of them that are responsible, but that there are signs that it could be all of those trees in that group that are responsible for the damage with the cyclical movement that's been noted.
Councillor Cunningham, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. In fact, it's touching on what Councillor Laming has been talking about, and that is the culpability of all four as opposed to the culpability of one or more.
I think that's just been covered. Thank you.
Hang on.
Oh.
Have you actually got any detail in terms of the distance between each of these four trees and the corner of the property where the actual shrinkage and the subsidence is occurring?
I think, Councillor, it's probably best suited for myself. So the species has been identified and implicated, and we're talking about the group of the oak trees here. The point you're making is about establishing, if you like, beyond all reasonable doubt, i.e. to a very high standard of proof that this particular tree is the main cause, therefore we should only prune that particular tree. We're not in that territory of, if you like, the high burden of proof. We're on a civil standard here, which is on a balance of probabilities. The higher burden of proof is a criminal standard. Here we're in a civil context. So on a balance of probabilities, are those trees the likely cause of the subsidence in this particular case? The soil desiccation, which then leads to the movement of the conservatory as a result of the trees taking uptake of water. So on a civil standard, yes, they meet that test. There is a strong risk here that obviously if you refuse this, you will be liable for costs and compensation from their legal team. So I think it's right I give that particular warning here because our own arborist has conceded the arguments as well, that these trees are implicated, the roots have been found, the soil shows desiccation as well at the certain levels required to show undermining of the foundations. The only point that hasn't been proven, if you like, and it's the one that you quite rightly identify, which particular tree is the main culprit. However, they've met the civil standard. I would respectfully submit here that on a balance of probabilities, those trees are liable for the subsidence.
Thank you very much. I think we've covered every possible branch and twig of this particular questioning. So shall we move to debate, members? I'd just like to start by saying I think it's up to the government to stop this blackmail effectively of local authorities and to put trees first, but we're not at that position yet. The government has not stood up for trees in this case. We are facing government regulations which say that if we refuse to agree to this severe pruning, we will be liable for costs and other costs, and it's going to be a lot of money. Now we're not in a position to pay that out or to take that risk on behalf of the council. So I will be supporting extremely reluctantly the officer recommendation to permit this work to the trees, simply because we have no option but to do so, in my view. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit I was somewhat surprised at this particular application. Denmead, 3/4 of Denmead is built on London clay, if not a higher proportion. London clay is a real problem. The Memorial Hall, on the contrary, in the middle of the village, is built on sand and has 3 bricks as its foundation. It stood there over 100 years now. So, but this is very similar to a application from, again, an insurance company of a very similar nature further up the village, when the whole of the tree had to come out because the cracks had gone initially into the conservatory, and at the point of the application they had actually started to go into the house and cracks were appearing all over the house. And this was why my question was earlier on. I'm not terribly sure how long, in a sense, the house would have. I remember this as a boundary for Mead End Farm. The house, I must admit, 38, I can't remember when it was built, but I'm sure it was built just after I moved into Denmead, which is in 74. So looking at the style of the house, it looks a little bit late 70s to look at it. The addition of the conservatory and obviously at that point the legal depth for the foundations were correct. What has actually happened is climate change. And climate change means the roots are going to go further afield to try and find water in order to survive. The tree opposite my house, well, adjacent to my house, that had a massive trim back. And we all thought, oh God, it's going to die. In fact, it is absolutely full, and it's rather worrying because it's leaning towards my way. But I've got about 20 oak trees in the back of my garden, haven't we? And they are all very tall trees. And undoubtedly, this row of trees are very, very significant to the landscape, undoubtedly. But it could and possibly will, in the not too distant future, cause problem for the main house itself. Reluctantly, I think we've got no other option than to do the work that's been prescribed. As I say, I am rather surprised that the insurance company didn't ask for them to be totally removed due to their close proximity to the house.
Any further contributions to debate? Councillor Laming.
I think that we are in a very unenviable situation here. I think the owner has to take some responsibility for buying a property so close to trees. I think the insurance company charges extra for trees being that close, and they have to take some responsibility. And I think we need to think very carefully about whether we take such a radical solution on this, and whether we should consider reducing them just slightly compared to what they're the 70% that you're looking at.
That's not the application before us, I'm afraid, Councillor Laming. Councillor Lee.
I'm trying to do some lateral thinking here on behalf of the trees, and I'm failing. But is there any way we can appeal to the owners who obviously got this insurance claim and ask them to reconsider, because there are modern techniques that will fix their conservatory and then will future-proof it? I accept what Councillor Reid says. You know, obviously, sometime in the future with climate change, there's going to be a problem. But it's just a thought, and I guess you're going to tell me this is not something we can interfere with or intercede.
I was just going to point out myself, Chair, that the tree team sit within our sustainability team, and we have the principal tree officer here who's been working with John within our NERT team, and they're very much leading on things in terms of sustainability and climate change and the emergency actions that we've served in respect of wildlife as well. And so this application has come before you because we have done everything we can to prevent the loss of these trees. It's obviously very important to the natural environment team and also very important to this council. So and I'll just say I've had a quick conversation, and looking at risk, we have done everything we can to try to deal with this and not lose the immunity. And in risk, I think it's pretty clear that we're well over 50-50 as to whether we'd be liable for 75,000. I think we're well over 50-50 that cost is probably going to get pushed up into a six-figure sum as well, in terms of risk that I really want you to consider if should you not be approving this. Thanks.
Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Yes, I think this is absolutely tragic, because it's perfectly possible to put buildings much closer to trees if you use screw pilings and proper foundations. I've just been doing a hospital down in Bournemouth with exactly that situation, but it ended up with this conservatory, which is obviously doesn't meet the requirements. And I'm slightly lost to understand where the 75,000 comes from, because you could probably buy 3 conservatories for that price. If you start talking about foundations of the house, yes, that would be an expensive thing. But I mean, you could take a conservatory down, put screw pilings in and a steel frame, and put a conservatory up on top, and I think you probably get change from 35,000.
Not bad. Not if it goes to appeal, then you get all the extra financial costs of lawyers, and it just goes on and on. You know that it's a bottomless pit.
It's the further damage it causes should we not make the decision today. It's the underpinning. These are costly things.
Right, I think that is at the end of debate, members. Thank you. Let's make the decision then. So this application is recommended for approval. Can I see all those approving, please? No matter how reluctant.
Or 5, Chair.
Those against?
2, Chair.
And abstentions?
1.
So that application is very reluctantly approved. And that's the end of today. If you could stop the recording, please, Claire.